That's a cargo plane, engines spinning up, somewhere on a runway with no name on the departures board and no logo on the tail. It's 3 a.m., and the men loading it aren't wearing airline uniforms. They're wearing body armor. Whatever's in those crates, it's guarded like a head of state. It's heavier than it should be, and it is being moved in the one window of the day when almost nobody is watching. This isn't a heist. It isn't a black ops mission. It's not fiction at all. It's a government, flying its own money home, in the dark, under guard, like it doesn't trust anyone to see it leave. Gold, bar after bar of it, sitting for decades in a vault it didn't build, in a country it doesn't control. And tonight, it's leaving, quietly, before anyone can ask why. Here's what should actually keep you up at night. This isn't one nervous government. It's dozens of them, in the same handful of years, moving the same way, for the same unspoken reason, like they all got the same warning, on the same night, and never told the rest of us. What do they know that you don't? January 2026. Gold obliterates every record in human history. $5,405 an ounce. Every anchor on every channel says the exact same sentence. The dollar is dying, the world is fleeing to gold. Buckle up. 5 months later, that number is gone, crashed almost 20%, as if the stampede away from the dollar just changed its mind. So which is it? Because you don't get to have both. A world panicking out of the dollar doesn't quietly reverse itself in 5 months. Something else is moving underneath this story. Something that has nothing to do with panic, and everything to do with one phone call, made in the spring of 2022, that every finance minister on Earth was secretly listening in on. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what that call was, and why it's still landing planes at 3 a.m. 4 years later. Let's get into it. Here's a question that should bother you more than it does. Why does a piece of paper with a dead president's face on it buy you a coffee anywhere on Earth? It's not backed by gold. It hasn't been since 1971, when Richard Nixon went on television and cut the US dollar loose from gold completely. No warning, no vote, just, this is how it is now. Economists at the time predicted disaster. Instead, the opposite happened. The dollar didn't collapse, it became more powerful than ever. Not because of gold anymore, because of trust. The whole world agreed, silently, to treat safe as a US Treasury bond, as close to a law of physics. For 50 years, that trust was the operating system of the entire global economy. Governments kept their emergency savings, trillions of dollars of it, sitting in US banks, US Treasury bonds, US institutions, not because they loved America, because it was safe. The one thing everyone agreed you could always count on. Then, in the spring of 2022, one country found out that wasn't true anymore. Russia invades Ukraine. Within days, the United States and its allies do something no one had ever done at this scale before. They freeze more than $300 billion of Russia's own central bank reserves, money Russia had saved for decades. Money it thought was untouchable, sitting quietly in Western banks, earning interest, doing its job as a national safety net. Gone. Frozen. Not stolen exactly, but not usable either. Overnight, one of the largest economies on Earth discovered that its own savings account had a lock on it, and someone else was holding the key. Here's why that single afternoon mattered more than almost anyone realized at the time. Every other government on the planet was watching, and every single one of them ran the same private calculation. If it happened to Russia, it could happen to us. Not because they were planning to invade anyone, because a reserve you don't physically hold, a number in someone else's bank, in someone else's country, under someone else's law, was never really yours. It was always a favor, and favors can be revoked. That's the lesson, not ideology, not some grand plan to kill the dollar, just the most expensive lecture on counterparty risk in modern history. And it's the reason for everything you're about to see. So what did every finance ministry on Earth actually do about it? 2 things at the same time. First, they started buying gold like never before. Since that 2022 freeze, central banks have bought roughly 1,000 tons of gold every single year, double the pace of the decade before. It's been enough to push gold past a milestone almost nobody predicted. In 2025, gold officially overtook the euro to become the world's second largest reserve asset, behind only the dollar itself. The second most trusted store of national wealth on the planet is now a metal that pays no interest, sits in a vault, and does absolutely nothing, except exist, outside anyone else's legal reach. Second, and this is the part almost nobody's covering, they started bringing the gold they already had home. France quietly moved 129 tons of gold out of the Federal Reserve's vault in New York between mid-2025 and early 2026. It now stores all of its gold on its own soil. India cut the share of its gold reserves held overseas from 55% down to 22% in just 3 years, pulling bullion out of vaults in London and pulling it back home. And in Germany, which keeps the second largest gold reserve on Earth, there's a live, unresolved argument happening right now about roughly 1,200 tons, worth well over $100 billion, still sitting in the New York Fed. Former central bank officials are openly saying it's time to bring it back. Their own words, "Our gold is no longer safe in the Fed's vaults." That's the plane from the cold open. That's what it's carrying. Not paranoia. A very literal, very physical answer to a very literal, very physical question every government just asked itself. If my money isn't safe in someone else's country, where can I actually reach it myself? You'd think that means the story is simple. The world is uniting against the dollar. It's not. Because the closer you look at who's actually doing this buying, the less it looks like a united front, and more like something almost nobody predicted. Here's the story you'd expect. China and Russia, the two countries most at odds with Washington, leading a gold rush away from the dollar, with everyone else following. Here's what actually happened in 2026. The single largest gold buyer in the world this year isn't China. It isn't Russia. It's Poland, a NATO member, a US ally, buying gold not to escape the dollar, but because it sits on the border of a live war and wants a reserve that can't be sanctioned, seized, or cut off by anyone, including its own allies. And Russia, the country the entire de-dollarization story is supposedly built around. In 2026, Russia is one of the world's biggest gold sellers. Not buying, selling. Because a war is expensive, and gold is one of the few assets it has left that anyone will still take. Even the price itself tells a messier story than the headlines. Analysts who break down exactly why gold moves found that this year, plain old market momentum, gold going up because gold is going up, traders chasing the trend, explained roughly 4 times more of the price action than interest rates did. A huge chunk of that record-breaking rally wasn't a grand geopolitical statement. It was a crowd, watching a chart, doing what crowds do. So no, this was never a clean, unified revolt against the dollar. It's messier than that and more human. Fear, opportunism, war spending, and herd behavior, all pushing the same metal upward for completely different reasons, in the same 12 months. Which raises the real question underneath all of this. If it's this complicated, is the dollar actually in trouble at all? Here's the honest, unspun number, no drama attached. 25 years ago, the US dollar made up roughly 70% of every dollar, euro, yen, and yuan held in reserve by governments worldwide. Today, it's 57%. Reserve managers surveyed about where this is heading expect it to keep sliding toward roughly 50% within the next decade. That is real. That is historic. That is not a currency in free fall. It's a 50-year dominant position, slowly, quietly, losing ground for the first time in living memory. And here's the strange contradiction sitting underneath all of it, the one that actually explains why the plane from the cold open makes sense. Central banks around the world were surveyed about their reserves, and every single one of them said they planned to keep growing their savings. But more than half also said they'd be reluctant to actually spend more than 10% of those reserves, even in a real crisis. Read that twice. They all want more of a safety net they refuse to ever actually use. That's not a government preparing to abandon the dollar for gold. That's a government building the biggest, most expensive insurance policy in the world, one it hopes, more than anything, it never actually has to file a claim on. Go back to that unmarked plane. You know what's in the crates now. You know why it's flying at night, under guard, to a vault its own government controls. It's not a signal that the dollar is dying. It's not a bet that gold is about to make anyone rich. It's 100 governments, independently, quietly, all learning the same lesson at the same time. The safest place for your money is somewhere nobody else can freeze it. That lesson didn't start with gold. It started with $300 billion, frozen in an afternoon, in a war nobody expected. Gold is just where it ended up. The dollar isn't dying. But for the first time in 50 years, it's no longer the only answer to the question every country on Earth is quietly asking itself. If the worst happened tomorrow, whose vault is my money actually sitting in? Drop a comment. If you had to bet, is the dollar still the safest place on earth to park $1 trillion, or is gold's slow comeback just getting started? I read every one of them. And if this made you wonder what happens to your own savings while all of this quietly plays out above your head, that's exactly what the next video is going to cover. Subscribe so you don't miss it.